Genesis 22, 1 to 14. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey, while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father." "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said. "But where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Amen.
Thanks very much, son. Quite a challenging chapter, this one, a real challenge of a chapter. But some aspects of it, you see some of the glorious shades and shadows of the Father in heaven and his Son, and the willingness to go all the way. And I thought it'd just be nice, just for this morning, just to ponder upon some points that come out. It's an easy chapter to preach in one sense. It's a narrative, I know, but it just brings out little points that we can look at and just move on to the next. And I trust it'll be of some blessing to you. Certainly in my readings, it's been something that has helped and encouraged over the last couple of days, and we trust that will be the same for you. But God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and Abraham replied, "Here I am." When God tests us, does he tempt us? Well, no, he doesn't. The Lord doesn't tempt any man. And there's a difference between testing and being tempted. To be tested means, or is looking to bring the best out of you, To be tempted is looking to bring the worst out of you. To be tested is looking to lead you to victory. But to be tempted is looking to lead you to failure. So you can see why God doesn't never tempt you. He's not looking to bring the worst out of you. He knows what you're like anyhow. And so he's not looking to see how bad you can be. He's looking to see for the best of you coming out. And Abraham's response is one that is the answer of a servant, really. He said, here I am. It's an immediate response. It's at your orders, sir, that type of thing. In the book of Psalms, it talks not so much of the hearing of the servant, but the eyes of the servant. David compares it as the eyes of a servant looks to the hand of their master. So our eyes look to you, and the hands tell us so much, especially for the servant. With the folding of the arms, he knows the master has finished his food. All those different things, by the washing of the hands and all these different... So he's looking to the hands all the time for the master. But here Abraham, his ear is attuned. It was something that Samuel had to get used to. Samuel heard his voice, I think, 3 times before he understood that it was the voice of God speaking to him. And so we have this attuning to listen to what God is saying. But the command is this: take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and there offer him as a burnt offering to the Lord. The test is not a narrow test, it's a very wide test. It's not singular, it's multiple, it's testing every fibre of his being. When it talks of your son, your only son, whom you love, we see so many of the emotions and so much of the build-up of character that's there in a believer. First of all, your son. Abraham believed God, and we find that because he believed God, that the son came forth. He put his trust in faith, or he put his faith in God. And so when he asked that his son would be taken and offered as a burnt offering, his faith was being tested. Your only son, not only was his faith being tested, but his hope was being tested. There was no other way around this plan that God had for him. He believed that the future blessing of the nations would be bound up in his son, Isaac. And so the hope that Abraham had was tested to the very end of the tether. The hope that we speak of in the Bible is not something that is fleeting. It's not something that is wishing. It's something that is a certain assurance, a confidence. It's something that is, well, it's there, inside. And so his faith is tested. His hope is tested. The son whom you love, his love is tested. And so we find that this test is not something down one narrow way. It's testing so many areas of Abraham as a follower of the Lord. We find that he's to be offered as a burnt offering, and everything with a burnt offering is to be consumed. There is to be nothing spared. There was no room to maneuver at all for Abraham. And yet we find his response is immediate. He rose early the next morning. Verse 3 tells us that his response was an immediate response. And he had a certain amount of time to chew over what had been said to him, what was laying before him. And then we find in verse 4 that it's not just the immediacy of his response, it's the constancy of his response as well. Because we find that he's there. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the land or the mountain that God had spoken to him of. And so there's an immediate response and there's a constant response. And I know I'm moving quickly through it, but really we're trying to get through those verses that are really standing out here. The test was to bring the best out of Abraham, not to bring him to failure, but to bring him into victory, to bring him into a sense of... There we are. All right, Liz.
Sorry, you thought it was only that past.
Don't worry now. Come on in. Don't worry. So start again. Don't worry, Izzy. No problem at all. No we see that this challenge that he has is to bring the best out of him, to lead him into victory. And so Abraham responds. He's heard that voice before, and that voice has never let him down. And he responds immediately. He responds the next morning at the first opportunity to gather together 2 servants, to gather together Isaac and the wood that is to go with him. And they set off. 3 days later, sitting down, chewing it over, walking and going through the midst of all the different parts of the journey, we find that there's a constancy there. He's not looking to get out of it. He's looking for that place that God had spoken to him of. So he rose early. And on the 3rd day, he saw that place. It's that sense of togetherness in the whole of the chapter. Here we find that Abraham took 2 of his young men with his son Isaac. And we find that this crops up now and it becomes narrower just for a little while, because he speaks to them, to the young men in verse 5. He says, the young man and I. You see, I notice with that it says the boy. I notice with the New King James it says the lad. Isaac is not a lad here. He's a man. He's a man. He's not a boy. There's a Sunday school lesson and the books will tell you. He's a man. In the next chapter, he's 37 years of age because his mother dies. And so we find that this is a man in his prime. He can easily overcome his father, who is now aged. That will be no problem for him. And so we find that Abraham, he's not unfolding what's going on, but they're together. They leave together. They leave the 2 men together. And it says they both went up. The young man and I shall go yonder and worship and come back to you. And so we find with this, verse 6 tells us that they went together. Verse 7 and 8 tells us they went together. The Father and the Son are in complete unison. They are oneness. Isaac doesn't know what's ahead. Doesn't know. He hasn't. It's quite clear that as we read into it. But we see that togetherness. They left together. They left the 2 men together. They walked together as they went up the hill. And they were together as they came to the place where the sacrifice was to be made. Even when they leave the place and head back home to Beersheba, they are together. And so the Father and the Son are together throughout all of this. And so we see that even in our Heavenly Father and the Son, that there is a unison, there is a conformity, there is a way in which God and as Father and Son, they completely link together. With every shade, with every shadow, with every type, a shadow can never go into the full detail. It is not able to show any depth. It is only able to give the outline. It's not able to fill in the details. And so we find here, in this account, that in verse 6 it says, Abraham took the wood and laid it on his son. It was him to bear the burden up the hill. Now this differs from the account that the gospel gives, because some will turn and say, well, this is the account of where Christ went to Calvary. Well, no, we know that Simon the Cyrenian carried the cross for Christ. But some look at it in this way and say he bore the burden of that, of him carrying the wood up the hill as a symbol of Christ's ministry of burden. Now, whether that's stretching it too far, I don't know. It may well be. But certainly, in verses 7 and 8, we're told this. Isaac spoke to his father and said to him, my father, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? He's not aware, see. He doesn't know. And this is where the shade and type, that's why you can never build a doctrine, a faith, simply on shades and types, because they never take in all the detail. They can add weight to a teaching, they can add weight and authority to something that is found in the scriptures, but you cannot base it on a type or a shadow, because the detail is never in there to the full extent. So we find with Christ, when he came into the world, he knew fully why he had come. For this cause came I into the world. He understood fully. But you see, we see these glorious glimpses of the Father and of the Son. In one instance, the Abraham being the father, and in one instance, Isaac being the son. And we have a perfect picture that comes out sometimes, but then we find with these shades and shadows that not every detail is picked out. In the New King James, as I mentioned, it talks of Isaac being a lad, and it talks in the version that Dot kindly brought to us, that he was a lad. But as I mentioned, he would have been a man in his prime. You remember, you say, well, that's an odd thing to say. You remember Paul writing to Timothy, who at that time was pastoring the church in Ephesus. He turned and said to him, let no man despise your youth. He was still a man. And so we find with this man, he turns and says to him, my son, God will provide himself a lamb. I think the Authorized Version has picked up something that the New King James has put aside a little. Because in the New King James, God himself, or for himself, will provide a lamb. But the Authorized Version picks it up and says, God himself will provide a lamb. And literally, we find in the future that God himself became the lamb. We find that perfectly in there. Verse 9 tells us they came to the place, and Abraham built the altar and bound Isaac and laid him on the altar. It's a marvelous thing of resignation here, isn't it? Of the son. An incredible sense of resignation both for Isaac and for Abraham to do the complete will of God here. He took him and bound him and laid him on the altar. We find with Christ, don't we, this willingness. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. It's this resignation that is not passive. It's very active. But there's a resignation there that surrenders to the Lord. Verse 10 says, Abraham took the knife to slay Isaac, but the angel of the Lord stopped him, saying, now I know that you fear God and have not held back your son. Your Abraham's hand is stayed. And 1,000 years later, we read when David is in this same mountain area in Moriah, at the field of Verona, that we're told that the angel of God, his hand was stayed. Here it was for worship, a burnt offering to be offered. There it was for judgment, where the angel of God was to decimate over 70,000 people in the whole land of Israel in the time of David for the wrongs that he had done. But here, the hand is stayed. There it stayed. But there on Calvary, which is on that mount in range of Moriah, there on Calvary, the hand of God is not stayed. It's complete sacrifice that is given. Abraham took the knife to slay Isaac, but the angel of the Lord stopped him. Now I know you fear God and have not held back your son. You see that burnt offering? Everything was to be consumed. And we find with Abraham this commendation given there. You have not held back your son. Everything to be consumed. Abraham lifted his eyes, we're told in verse 13, and looked behind him. And there was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. And so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. He lifted his eyes and found a ram with his horns caught in the thicket. We find with Christ, don't we, on Calvary, his head caught or crowned with a thicket of thorns. We looked at the other day in the story of Abimelech in the book of Judges, that he was likened to a bramble or to a thorn bush. It's exactly the same thing. It's good for nothing but for burning. Good for nothing at all. It only causes trouble. And here, a ram is trapped in the thorns of the thicket. And there we find on Calvary that the Son of God, his head was crowned with thorns on Calvary's tree. And so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. You see, the truth of the matter is this: Isaac was never going to be good enough to be offered as a burnt offering. I think I quoted it last week. There was no other good enough to pay the price of sin. And a ram was brought in instead of a man. It doesn't mean that God is saying that human sacrifice is not the answer, because we find that there was one human sacrifice that was the answer, the Lord Jesus Christ. And so he, as a human being, was sacrificed. A ram or a son, like Isaac, as good as he was, could never take that place. But God's Son came into this world with complete resignation, understanding fully what lay ahead of him, came and suffered what he suffered, that he might set us free. We find that Abraham, Isaac, and the two men, they go home together, rejoicing, with the blessing of God reiterated within his ears. Blessing, I bless you. Multiplying, I'll multiply you. It'll be like the sands on the seashore. It'll be like the stars that are in the sky. There will be millions, possibly billions, of those that will hold to the truth that you have held to today. Abraham believed God. He believed him for his son Isaac. And we find this wonderful, glorious shades of both father and son being reflected in this story. Abraham allowing his most beloved son to go all the way, so to speak. It wasn't until the angel of God stopped his hand. May we ponder today the Father's love. May we ponder today the Son and his love, that he gave everything for us. And they today are rejoicing with those that are like the sand upon the seashore, like the stars that are in the sky, the believers that follow in the footsteps of Abraham. Have you given your heart to the Lord? Have you offered yourself, as in this offering? You've not held back. It's something that we can ponder and consider. May the voice of God speak to our hearts this day and every day. In Jesus' name. Well, thank you for your time.